Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck of the Galactic Confederation station, watching ships from dozens of worlds drift past like colorful butterflies. The Zephyrian vessels looked like soap bubbles with their transparent hulls, while the resonant ships hummed softly as they moved, their crystal structures catching starlight and throwing rainbows across space. Earth's ship looked crude next to them. The heavy gray hull showed wear marks from countless journeys, and the design focused on function over beauty. Most aliens who saw it for the first time made the same comment. It looked like it was built for war. They were not wrong. "The council meeting starts in an hour," said Dr. Marcus Webb, joining Sarah at the window. He carried a data pad filled with reports from his latest humanitarian mission. "The Delarian plague is finally under control. Their immune systems are so delicate that what we consider a minor virus nearly wiped out their entire colony." Sarah nodded, not surprised. Most species in the galaxy had evolved on worlds where the biggest danger was seasonal weather changes or the occasional mild predator. When the Galactic Confederation first discovered Earth, they had created an entire new classification system just for it. Class Thothin Deathworld, the highest possible rating. Earth had weather systems that could destroy cities in minutes, tectonic plates that moved without warning, swallowing entire regions, animals that had evolved to kill with perfect efficiency, plants that could poison you with a touch, microscopic life forms that waged constant war against anything that lived. The galaxy had expected humans to be monsters. Instead, they found diplomats. "Ambassador Chen," came a melodic voice behind them. Sarah turned to see Council Speaker Lithia approaching, her Zephyrian wings folding against her slender frame. "The preliminary reports from the Outer Rim are concerning. There have been more attacks on trading ships," Sarah frowned. For months, merchant vessels had been disappearing near the galaxy's edge. The few survivors spoke of strange insectoid ships that seemed to grow from nothing, attacking without warning or demands. "Any new information about who's responsible?" Sarah asked. "The Keth Mori patrol fleets have found debris," Lithia said, her voice carrying worry. "The attackers use weapons that seem to eat through hull plating. And the survivor reports all mention the same thing, ships that look alive." Dr. Webb looked up from his data pad. "Biotechnology? Perhaps. We've called this emergency session because 3 more colonies have gone silent in the past week. The Council needs to decide how to respond." Sarah felt a familiar chill. On Earth, when predators started moving closer to settlements, it usually meant something had driven them from their normal hunting grounds. "Something bigger and more dangerous. We'll attend, of course," she said. "Has anyone tried direct contact with whatever's out there?" Lithia's expression grew more troubled. "Fleet Admiral Veltar of the Keith Mori tried 2 days ago. His battle group they were completely destroyed. Only one ship escaped, and barely. The captain was found in his quarters, catatonic. He keeps repeating the same words over and over." "What words?" "They never stopped coming. They just kept coming." An hour later, Sarah sat in the council chamber surrounded by representatives from over 200 worlds. The great circular room buzzed with dozens of languages, translation devices working overtime to keep communication flowing. At the center, a holographic display showed the galaxy's outer rim, with red marks indicating attacked or missing colonies. Council Speaker Lithia called for order, her voice amplified throughout the chamber. "Fellow beings, we face an unprecedented crisis. In 3 months, we have lost contact with 47 colonies and trading posts. The attacks are becoming more frequent and more organized." Fleet Admiral Gorvak of the Centaurian Navy stood, his forearms gesturing at the display. "My fleets have searched the affected areas. We found no trace of the attackers' base of operations. They strike without warning, destroy everything, and vanish completely." "What do we know about their technology?" asked Representative Quill, the aquatic pelagic speaking through a water-filled communication sphere. "Bioorganic ships, definitely," replied Admiral Gorvak. "But more advanced than anything we've seen. They appear to heal damage faster than we can inflict it. Standard energy weapons barely slow them down." Nervous murmurs rippled through the chamber. The galaxy had enjoyed peace for over 1,000 years. Most military forces were designed for peacekeeping and disaster relief, not actual warfare against an unknown enemy. "What about diplomatic contact?" suggested Elder Harmonix, the crystalline resonance voice creating soft musical notes. "Perhaps they can be reasoned with." Admiral Gorvak's expression darkened. "The survivors all report the same thing. No communication attempts, no demands, no warnings. They attack immediately and fight until everything is destroyed or they retreat. There's no negotiation. Sarah had been listening quietly, but something about the attack patterns bothered her. On Earth, predators had predictable behaviors. They hunted for food, defended territory, or eliminated threats. This sounded different. "Admiral," she said, standing. "The attacks, do they follow any pattern? Specific types of colonies or resources they target?" "No pattern we can identify, Ambassador. They've hit mining operations, agricultural worlds, research stations, even peaceful meditation retreats. The only common factor is that they take everything, resources, technology, and—" He paused. "And what?" "Prisoners. Every attack site shows evidence of people being taken alive." The chamber fell silent. Slavery had been abolished galaxy-wide for centuries. The idea that someone was deliberately capturing sentient beings sent a chill through the assembled representatives. Dr. Webb leaned forward in his seat beside Sarah. She could see him processing the information, his medical training making him think about what captors might want with live prisoners from multiple species. "How many people are we talking about?" Webb asked. "Conservative estimate? Over 2 million beings," Admiral Gorvac replied. The number hit the chamber like a physical blow. 2 million people, taken from their homes by unknown attackers who refused all communication. Speaker Lithia addressed the assembly. "The question before us is simple: how do we respond? Our peacekeeping forces have proven inadequate against this threat. Some have suggested we attempt to appease these attackers by offering tribute or territory. And if that fails," Sarah asked, "then we face the possibility of evacuation, moving our populations away from the outer rim until these attackers move on or lose interest." Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach, running away. Abandoning millions of people to unknown captors. It went against everything humans had learned about dealing with predators. "With respect, Speaker Lithia," Sarah said, standing again, "has anyone considered the possibility that retreat might not be an option? If these attackers are taking prisoners and resources, they're not going to stop because we give them empty space. They'll just follow us deeper into the galaxy." "What do you suggest?" asked Elder Harmonix. Sarah looked around the chamber at hundreds of representatives from peaceful worlds, species that had never needed to develop serious military capability because they'd never faced a real threat. They were looking at her with hope. Because humans had a reputation as excellent peacekeepers and negotiators, they had no idea what humans could really do. "Earth requests permission to send a diplomatic mission to the affected area," she said carefully. "We have some experience dealing with hostile environments and aggressive species. Perhaps we can make contact where others have failed." The chamber buzzed with discussion. Several representatives voiced support for the human proposal, while others worried it might provoke the attackers. Dr. Webb stood beside Sarah. "My medical teams are ready to assist with refugee care and treatment of survivors. We've dealt with trauma cases from natural disasters. This can't be much different." Sarah almost smiled at that. Marcus had no idea how different this was going to be. Speaker Lithia called for a vote. The result was unanimous. Humanity would be given full authority to attempt first contact with the unknown aggressors. As the session ended and representatives filed out, Sarah remained seated staring at the holographic display. The red marks were spreading faster now, like an infection moving toward the galaxy's heart. Dr. Webb noticed her expression. "Sarah, what's wrong?" She turned to look at him. This gentle healer who had spent years saving lives across the galaxy. Soon she might have to tell him that saving lives would require taking them. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I need you to send a message to Earth. Priority Alpha encryption." "What should it say?" Sarah looked back at the spreading red marks, thinking about 2 million captured people and attackers who refused all negotiation. "Tell them it might be time to remember what we used to be." The message from Earth came back in less than 6 hours, which meant they had been expecting Sarah's call. The reply was short and encrypted so heavily that it took her personal codes to decode it. "Understood. Preparations beginning. Try diplomacy first. Always try diplomacy first." Sarah stared at the message for a long time. The last line wasn't an order, it was a reminder. A reminder of who humans chose to be among the stars and why they had made that choice. 3 days later, reports started coming in from the outer rim that made Sarah's blood run cold. The attacks weren't random anymore. They were coordinated, systematic, and moving inward toward the galaxy's more populated regions. The first concrete intelligence came from a badly damaged Kethmori scout ship that limped into Nexus Station with half its crew dead and the rest in shock. Captain Zorvak, a veteran warrior whose people had once been the galaxy's premier fighters, could barely speak. They came from everywhere, he whispered to the debriefing committee. Ships that looked like they were grown instead of built, black and red with surfaces that moved like skin. When we shot them, the holes sealed themselves. When we damaged their weapons, new ones sprouted from the hull. Dr. Webb, who had been treating the survivors, looked up from his medical reports. Captain, you mentioned in your preliminary statement that they communicated with you. Not words, Zorvak said, shuddering. Signals, broadcasts on every frequency, images of our colonies burning. Our people in cages, and always the same message at the end. What message? Submit or be consumed. Sarah felt her jaw clench. The diplomatic part of her mind cataloged this as useful information. At least the attackers were capable of communication. The other part of her mind, the part that remembered Earth's history, recognized something else entirely. This wasn't war. This was extermination with an offer to become slaves instead. The committee debriefed Captain Zorvak for 3 more hours, but the story remained the same. Ships that healed themselves, weapons that grew from living hull material, and attackers that fought with perfect coordination like parts of a single organism. When the session ended, Sarah found herself walking the station's corridors with Dr. Webb. Around them, refugees from the outer rim huddled in temporary shelters, their faces showing the hollow look of people who had lost everything. The medical examinations are interesting, Marcus said, reviewing his data pad. Some of the prisoners who escaped show signs of surgical modification. Implants, neural interfaces, tissue alterations. Whoever these attackers are, they're not just taking slaves. They're changing them. Sarah stopped walking. Changing them how? Making them stronger, faster, more resilient, but also more compliant. The brain scans show alterations to areas associated with independent thought and emotional response. It's like they're creating perfect workers. Or perfect soldiers, Sarah said quietly. The next morning brought worse news. Admiral Gorvak appeared on the emergency channel, his 4-armed form showing signs of severe stress. Behind him, Sarah could see the bridge of his flagship, with crew members working frantically at their stations. The enemy has revealed themselves, he announced, without preamble. They call themselves the Tyrannic Hegemony. We have visual confirmation of their forces. The display screen filled with an image that made Sarah's human instincts scream warnings. Hundreds of bioships arranged in perfect formation, each one the size of a city. They looked like massive insects crossed with spaceships, their black carapaces gleaming with bioluminescent patterns. Smaller ships swarmed around them like antibodies, moving in patterns that seemed less like military formations and more like living tissue. Intelligence estimates put their numbers at over 10,000 ships, Admiral Gorvak continued. But that's just the advance force. Long-range sensors suggest the main body is still arriving from outside our galaxy. Outside? Sarah interrupted. They're not from here? No. They appear to have traveled from somewhere beyond our galactic boundary. We don't know how long they've been coming, but based on the organized nature of their attacks, they've been planning this invasion for years. Dr. Webb looked pale. An entire civilization dedicated to conquest and slavery. It gets worse, Admiral Gorvak said. We've intercepted some of their communications. They don't see us as enemies to be defeated. They see us as resources to be harvested, raw materials for their expansion. The transmission ended, leaving Sarah and Marcus alone with the horrible implications. This wasn't a territorial dispute or even a war for resources. The Tyrannic Hegemony wanted to consume the entire galaxy and everyone in it. Sarah activated her personal communicator and sent a priority message to Earth. Request immediate consultation. Situation has escalated beyond diplomatic solutions. The reply came back in 4 hours. Ambassador Chen requested on Sol Station. Transport dispatched. Tell Marcus to come too. The trip to Earth took 2 days on the fastest human ship available. Sarah spent most of the journey in her quarters, reviewing files that Earth's intelligence services had compiled about similar situations throughout human history. The patterns were always the same: aggressive expansion, systematic slavery, and complete rejection of negotiated solutions. On Earth, they called them existential threats. Sol Station orbited above Earth's North Pole, hidden in the shadow of humanity's homeworld. Sarah had been here only once before, during her initial diplomatic training. Back then, it had seemed like a museum, a reminder of humanity's violent past that they kept around for historical perspective. Now, it looked very different. The docking bay was filled with ships that Sarah didn't recognize. Sleek, dark vessels with hull designs that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Technicians in military uniforms worked with equipment that hummed with barely contained energy. Ambassador Chen, came a familiar voice. Sarah turned to see Admiral Rebecca Torres, Earth's highest-ranking military commander, walking toward them. Sarah had met her once at a diplomatic function where Torres had seemed like a relic from humanity's warrior past. Now she looked like exactly what the situation required. "Admiral," Sarah said, "I assume you've reviewed the intelligence reports?" "Everyone, along with some additional information our deep space monitoring stations picked up." Torres gestured for them to follow her through corridors lined with military personnel. "The tyrannic hegemony isn't just invading this galaxy. They've done this before." Dr. Webb looked confused. "Before? We've detected the remains of at least 3 other galaxies they've completely strip-mined, turned into resource extraction sites with no remaining intelligent life. This is what they do. They find a galaxy, consume everything useful, and move on." Sarah felt cold understanding settle in her chest. "How long do we have?" "Based on their current rate of advancement and resource consumption, they'll reach the core worlds in 18 months. After that, complete galactic conquest within 5 years." They entered a briefing room where dozens of Earth's top military strategists were gathered around holographic displays showing the galactic situation. Sarah recognized some faces from her diplomatic training. These were the people who had taught humanity how to wage war so effectively that they never had to do it again. Admiral Torres activated the central display, showing the tyrannic advance in real time. Red markers indicated conquered systems, while yellow showed systems under attack. The pattern was clear. They were moving in a coordinated spiral toward the galaxy's center, consuming everything in their path. "The Galactic Confederation's military forces are completely inadequate," Torres said bluntly. "They're designed for peacekeeping, not warfare against an enemy this advanced and ruthless. Every engagement so far has been a massacre. What about negotiation?" Dr. Webb asked. "Surely there's some common ground." Torres looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Doctor, we've intercepted their communications. They don't see us as intelligent life. We're organic matter to be processed. You can't negotiate with a virus." Sarah stared at the display, watching red markers spread deeper into galactic space. Billions of people in the path of an enemy that couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be appeased, and wouldn't stop until everything was consumed. "Admiral," she said slowly, "what are our options?" Torres was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of terrible necessity. "Ambassador, for 3 years you've represented the best of what humanity can be. Our diplomacy, our compassion, our commitment to peace. The galaxy loves us for it, and they should. It's who we chose to become among the stars." She paused, looking at the advancing red markers. "But before we became diplomats and healers, we were something else. We were survivors. And when survival is threatened, we remember very quickly what that means." Sarah closed her eyes. She had hoped it would never come to this. "What do you need from me?" "Authorization to activate the Sol defense protocols, and permission to recall every human in the galaxy back to Earth." "For evacuation?" Admiral Torres smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "No, Ambassador. For war." Sarah returned to the Galactic Confederation with authorization codes that felt like lead in her pocket. The journey back seemed longer than usual, giving her too much time to think about what those codes represented. When she had joined the diplomatic corps, she had sworn to never let humanity's past define its future. Now she was carrying humanity's future back to its past. The situation had grown worse in her absence. The tyrannic hegemony had accelerated their advance, and 3 more core systems had gone silent. The refugee crisis was overwhelming every station and colony ship in the galaxy. Families that had lived on the same worlds for thousands of years now huddled in cargo holds, carrying nothing but the clothes they wore when the evacuation ships arrived. Dr. Webb threw himself into relief work, setting up medical stations and trauma counseling centers. Sarah watched him work with desperate efficiency, treating species whose immune systems were so fragile that stress alone could kill them. He saved lives every day, and it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in a state of barely controlled panic. Representatives who had spent centuries in peaceful debate now shouted over each other, demanding solutions that didn't exist. The great chamber that had once symbolized unity and cooperation now felt like a tomb. The outer defense perimeter has collapsed completely, Admiral Gorvac reported, his forearms gesturing helplessly at the tactical display. We've lost contact with the entire Rim fleet. Over 300 ships simply gone. Council Speaker Lithia's usual grace had cracked under the weight of crisis. Her gossamer wings trembled as she spoke. The casualty reports are, they're beyond our ability to process. Entire civilizations, billions of beings reduced to statistical data. What about the human diplomatic mission? Asked Elder Harmonix, the crystalline resonance harmonic voice carrying desperate hope. Were they able to establish communication with the invaders? Sarah stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the chamber. Communication was established. The entity calling itself the Tyrannic Hegemony made their position clear. She activated her personal data pad, displaying the intercepted transmissions from the invading force. Harsh, chittering sounds filled the chamber, accompanied by images that made several representatives physically recoil. Complete surrender and absorption into their collective. All technology, resources, and population to be integrated into their expansion efforts. There are no negotiations, no compromises, and no alternatives offered. The chamber fell into stunned silence. For a civilization built on diplomatic solutions, the concept of an enemy that refused all negotiation was almost incomprehensible. Representative Quill's aquatic form rippled with distress in his communication sphere. Surely there must be something they want. Some concession we can make? They want everything, Sarah said simply. Every world, every resource, every living being. They view our galaxy as raw materials for their continued expansion. Then we fight, declared Captain Vexhai of the Andromedan Guard. We mobilize every ship, every weapon, every warrior across the galaxy. Admiral Gorvac's expression was grim. With respect, Captain, we've tried fighting. The Battle of Kepler's Gate cost us over 200 ships. The enemy lost perhaps a dozen, and those appeared to regenerate their damage within hours. Then we run, whispered Elder Harmonix. We evacuate the core worlds, find somewhere beyond their reach. There is nowhere beyond their reach, Sarah interrupted. Intelligence indicates they've consumed at least 3 other galaxies completely. They don't stop, they don't tire, and they don't leave survivors to resettle elsewhere. The horrible reality settled over the chamber like a shroud. This wasn't a war they could win with their current capabilities, and it wasn't a threat they could escape by running. The Tyrannic Hegemony represented extinction, complete and absolute. President Valdris of the Central Worlds Coalition rose from his seat, his aged face showing the strain of leadership during impossible times. Then we are truly facing the end. All our civilizations, all our achievements, all our dreams for the future. No. Sarah's voice cut through the despair like a blade. Every head in the chamber turned toward her. There is one option we haven't discussed. She took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would change everything. Not just for the galaxy, but for humanity's place in it. Article 0 of Earth's membership charter. My government has authorized me to invoke it if necessary. Confused murmurs rippled through the assembly. Most representatives had never heard of Article 0. It had been dismissed as meaningless legal language when humans joined the Confederation decades ago. Council Speaker Lithia accessed her archives, her eyes widening as she read. Article 0 states that in the event of an existential threat to galactic civilization, Earth reserves the right to implement necessary measures outside normal Confederation protocols. What does that mean? Demanded Admiral Gorvac. Sarah felt the weight of history pressing down on her. 3 years of careful diplomacy, of building trust and proving that humans could be peaceful neighbors, were about to be sacrificed on the altar of necessity. It means Earth has been preparing for this day since we joined the Confederation. We hoped it would never come. We've spent decades trying to become something better than what we were. But the Tyrannic Hegemony has made it clear that being better isn't enough. She activated her communicator, transmitting the authorization codes that Admiral Torres had given her. Across the galaxy, dormant systems began activating, Hidden installations came online and signals went out to every human in the galaxy with a simple message: come home. As of this moment, Earth is transitioning from Confederation Peacekeeping Protocol to Sol Defense Protocol. All human personnel are being recalled for reassignment. All human vessels are being retrofitted for combat operations. The chamber erupted in confusion and questions, but Sarah continued speaking, her voice carrying over the chaos. For those who don't understand what this means, let me be clear. The humans you know, the diplomats, the peacekeepers, the healers, they represent who we chose to become among the stars. But before we became those people, we were something else. Dr. Webb appeared at her side, having been summoned from the medical stations. His face was pale but resolved. The relief operations will be transferred to Confederation medical personnel. Human medical corps are being reassigned to other duties. What other duties? Demanded Captain Vexhai. Sarah looked around the chamber at representatives from hundreds of peaceful worlds, species that had evolved in safety and comfort, civilizations that had never needed to learn the harsh lessons that Earth had taught its children. The same duties our species performed for millions of years before we learned diplomacy, before we learned compassion, before we learned that there were better ways to solve problems than violence. She paused, letting the implications sink in. You called us Deathworlders, and you were right, but you never understood what that meant. It doesn't mean we're cruel or violent by nature. It means we're efficient. When our world tried to kill us every day for millions of years, we learned to be very good at making threats go away permanently. The authorization codes finished transmitting, and Sarah felt a subtle shift in the chamber's atmosphere. Several representatives were receiving priority communications from their intelligence services, reporting unusual activity throughout human space. The Sol system has been placed under military lockdown, she continued. Human civilians are being evacuated to secure facilities. Human military assets are being deployed to forward positions, and the Terran Defense Force is moving to intercept the Tyranic advance. How many ships? Asked Admiral Gorvac. Sarah checked her latest briefing. The initial deployment consists of 1,200 vessels. Shocked silence greeted this announcement. The entire Confederation Navy numbered fewer than 800 ships, and most of those were designed for peacekeeping rather than warfare. Where did you get 1,200 warships? President Valdris asked. We built them, Dr. Webb said quietly. Every human colony, every human station, every human facility has been contributing resources and personnel to the Sol Defense Initiative since we joined the Confederation. We hoped we'd never need them. But you prepared for this anyway, Elder Harmonix observed, his harmonic voice carrying new understanding. Sarah nodded. Because the universe is a dangerous place and peaceful species need someone willing to face that danger on their behalf. For 3 years we've been that someone through diplomacy and aid work. Now the situation requires different skills. The chamber's communication systems activated, broadcasting an incoming transmission on all frequencies. The voice that emerged was calm, professional, and carried the weight of absolute authority. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force. All Confederation vessels are ordered to withdraw to minimum safe distance from the combat zone. Effective immediately, human forces are assuming responsibility for dealing with the Tyranic incursion. Sarah felt a chill as she recognized her own voice, altered by military communication protocol she hadn't used in years. The ambassador was gone. The admiral had returned. Tyranic hegemony, the transmission continued. You have been offered the opportunity for peaceful coexistence and rejected it. You have chosen to threaten the innocent and enslave the free. The transformation began within hours. Across the galaxy, humans started moving with purpose that made other species step aside without understanding why. Dr. Marcus Webb finished his last civilian medical report, filed it with Confederation authorities, and received new orders that changed everything about who he was. Colonel Marcus Webb, Terran Medical Corps, Combat Division. The uniform felt strange after 3 years of civilian clothes, but his hands remembered how to check equipment that had nothing to do with healing. Med kits designed for battlefield trauma, surgical tools that could work in zero gravity while under fire, and pharmaceutical cocktails that could keep soldiers fighting long past normal human limits. The other humans at the medical station moved with the same quiet efficiency. Nurses became field medics. Doctors became combat surgeons. Researchers became biological warfare specialists. The gentle healers who had saved countless alien lives now prepared to save them in a very different way. "Transport leaves in 2 hours," announced Captain Rodriguez, who had been running supply logistics for refugee operations the day before. "All personnel report to Docking Bay 7 with full gear." Marcus packed his medical supplies alongside equipment he had hoped never to use again. Stimulant injectors for keeping wounded soldiers conscious. Coagulation foam for sealing wounds too severe for normal treatment. Portable surgical units designed to work while their patients were still fighting. At the docking bay, he found other humans he had worked with for years. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood near the transport, but she wore the dark blue uniform of the Terran Defense Force with Admiral's insignia on her collar. The diplomatic training that had made her famous throughout the galaxy was still there, but something else had awakened beneath it. "Doctor," she said, then corrected herself. "Colonel Webb, ready for reassignment?" "As ready as anyone can be for this," Marcus replied. Around them, humans moved with military precision that had been hidden behind years of civilian behavior. "How many others are coming home?" "All of them." Every human in the galaxy received recall orders 12 hours ago. Diplomats, merchants, researchers, teachers, everyone. Even the colonists? Sarah's expression hardened. "The Tyronic hegemony made that choice for us." Every human colony in the Outer Rim went silent in the last wave of attacks. "We're assuming total losses." The transport filled with humans who had spent years building peaceful lives among the stars. Now they carried weapons and moved with the controlled aggression of predators returning to hunt. The journey to Sol took 18 hours, but nobody slept. They studied tactical briefings, checked equipment, and prepared for war. Sol's system looked different when they arrived. The orbital platforms that had seemed like peaceful research stations were revealed as massive shipyards. Vessels moved between them in patterns that spoke of military logistics rather than scientific cooperation. And the ships themselves. Marcus had never seen anything like the Terran Defense Fleet, where Confederation vessels were built for beauty and comfort. These ships looked like they had been designed by evolution itself, smooth dark hulls that seemed to drink in starlight. Weapon arrays that folded into the hull when not needed. Drives that moved the ships like living creatures rather than mechanical constructs. "Jesus Christ," whispered Lieutenant Foster, a nurse who had been treating alien refugees just days before. "How long have we been building these?" "Since before we joined the Confederation," replied Admiral Chen, overhearing. "Every human world contributed resources. Every human facility manufactured components. Every human in the galaxy has been paying taxes to fund the Sol Defense Initiative." The transport docked with the flagship Pale Horse, a vessel that looked like it could crack planets in half. Inside, the corridors hummed with activity as thousands of recalled humans took their positions. Military personnel who had been pretending to be civilians for years. Scientists who had been developing weapons while claiming to study peaceful applications. Engineers who had been designing instruments of war while building hospitals and schools. Marcus found himself assigned to Battle Group 7, under the command of General Patricia Santos, a woman he had known as a xenobiology researcher. Her new uniform carried the insignia of the Terran Marine Corps, and her gentle manner had been replaced by the cold efficiency of someone who had spent her career learning how to kill things that shouldn't be killable. "Colonel," she said, reviewing his assignment, "your experience with alien physiology will be valuable. We need to understand how Tyronic biology works so we can find ways to stop it." "Stop it how?" General Santos activated a holographic display showing intercepted data about Tyronic forces. The bioships were even more disturbing up close, their hull surfaces writhing like skin, and their weapon ports opening like mouths full of teeth. They're organic technology, but still technology. Find their weaknesses, develop countermeasures, and design ways to kill them faster than they can adapt. Marcus stared at the display, his medical training automatically cataloging what he saw. These aren't just ships. They're living creatures, bred for warfare. Exactly. Which means they can be diseased, poisoned, or infected just like any other living thing. Your job is to figure out how. The next week passed in intensive preparation. Humans throughout the fleet studied everything known about the Tyronic hegemony, analyzing their technology and tactics with the focused intensity that had once let them survive on a world that tried to kill them. Daily, Marcus worked with teams of former researchers who had been secretly developing biological weapons for years. Their cover stories about peaceful medical research had been completely believable because the research had been real. They had just been studying how to cure diseases and how to weaponize them at the same time. The Tyranic ships use a form of distributed consciousness, explained Dr. Jennifer Hayes, who had been known throughout the galaxy as a specialist in alien neural networks. Each ship is essentially a single massive organism controlled by a central brain structure. Can we target that brain? Asked Marcus. Better than that. We can make it kill itself. The briefing room fell silent as Dr. Hayes activated her presentation. The display showed complex molecular structures that looked like nothing Marcus had seen before. Neurological agent designated Compound 7, she continued, designed specifically for distributed organic networks. It makes the central nervous system attack its own tissue, starting with higher functions and working down to basic life support. How do we deploy it? That's where things get interesting. The Tyranic ships are designed to heal damage by absorbing raw materials from their environment, including genetic material from their victims. Marcus felt cold understanding wash over him. You want to infect their healing systems? Exactly. We encode Compound 7 into modified human DNA. When they try to use our genetic material for repairs, they give themselves a terminal nervous disorder. Around the briefing room, other humans nodded with calm acceptance. 3 years of peaceful coexistence had not erased millions of years of evolutionary programming. When survival was threatened, humans remembered how to be efficient killers. The first engagement came sooner than expected. A Tyranic scouting force, 50 bioships strong, encountered Battle Group 7 at the Vega relay station. Admiral Chen's voice came over the fleet communication system with orders that would have horrified the galaxy a week ago. All units, this is Admiral Chen. Weapons free. Show them what happens when you threaten a death world. Species. The battle lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Marcus watched from the pale, horse's medical bay as human ships moved through space like hunting predators. They didn't fight like the Confederation Navy, with formal battle lines and careful tactical coordination. They fought like pack hunters, surrounding their prey and attacking from every angle at once. The Tyranic bioships tried to adapt, growing new weapons and armor in response to human attacks, but human weapons adapted faster, shifting frequencies and targeting methods before the aliens could compensate. Where Confederation forces had been overwhelmed by the enemy's ability to heal damage, human forces simply inflicted more damage than the healing systems could handle. When it was over, 17 Tyranic vessels drifted as lifeless hulks while the human fleet had lost nothing more than energy reserves and ammunition. Medical teams to recovery stations, came the order. We have prisoners to process. Marcus transported to one of the disabled bioships with a full surgical team. Inside they found the Tyranic crew. Insectoid beings the size of humans but with chitinous exoskeletons and compound eyes. Most were dead, but several had survived in protected sections of the ship. The survivors looked at Marcus with what he recognized as fear. These beings had conquered dozens of species, enslaved millions, and considered themselves the ultimate predators. Now they faced something they had never encountered before, a prey species that was better at killing than they were. Begin biological analysis, Marcus ordered his team. I want complete genetic profiles, neurological mapping, and tissue samples within the hour. One of the surviving Tyranics tried to communicate, chittering in a language that the translation systems couldn't process. Marcus didn't need translation to understand what it was saying. The war that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. For 6 weeks, human forces moved through space like a plague, systematically dismantling the Tyranic hegemony with cold efficiency that made other species watch in horrified fascination. Colonel Marcus Webb had stopped thinking of himself as a healer. On the medical ship Hippocrates, he worked with teams that had perfected the art of keeping enemies alive just long enough to extract every piece of useful information from their biology. The Tyranic prisoners provided genetic maps, neural pathways, and biological vulnerabilities that human weapons designers turned into increasingly devastating weapons. The new pathogen is ready for deployment, announced Dr. Hayes during the morning briefing. Compound 15 targets their reproductive systems. Any Tyranic exposed to it becomes sterile within hours and dies within days. Around the briefing room, humans who had once been teachers and researchers and diplomats nodded with calm acceptance. War had stripped away their peaceful masks and revealed the efficient predators underneath. Deployment method? Asked General Santos. aerosol delivery through their ship ventilation systems. Once we breach their hulls, automated drones deploy the compound throughout the vessel. No survivors, no adaptation, no recovery. Marcus reviewed the latest intelligence reports while Dr. Hayes spoke. The Tyronic hegemony was learning to fear human tactics. Their bioships had evolved new defensive capabilities, but human weapons evolved faster. Each engagement saw new horrors unleashed. Ships that turned their own healing systems into weapons of self-destruction. Weapons that made Tyronic crews tear apart their own vessels in confusion. And biological agents that made entire fleets go silent in minutes. "What's the current strategic situation?" Marcus asked. General Santos activated the tactical display, showing human forces advancing through what had once been Tyronic-controlled space. Red markers that had represented conquered systems were being systematically replaced with blue markers indicating human occupation. "We've retaken 60% of the Outer Rim territories. Tyronic resistance is collapsing faster than anticipated. They can't adapt to our tactics because we don't use the same tactics twice. Any word on prisoner recovery? Over 800,000 liberated so far. Most are in bad shape. The Tyronics were using them as raw materials for their bioships. Colonel Webb, your medical teams are needed at Liberation Point 7. Marcus transported to the prison ship with a full trauma team. What they found there would have broken him 3 years ago, before he remembered what humans could do when pushed beyond mercy. The liberated prisoners were barely recognizable as the species they had once been, Zephyrians with their wings surgically removed and replaced with mechanical appendages, resonance with their crystalline structures cracked and infected with Tyronic biotechnology. Pelagics kept alive in tanks that fed them nutrients while harvesting their genetic material. "How many can we save?" asked Lieutenant Foster, her face pale behind her medical mask. Marcus surveyed the hundreds of mutilated beings filling the ship's holds. His medical training cataloged injuries that should have been fatal, modifications that defied biological possibility, and suffering that went beyond physical damage into realms of psychological horror. "All of them," he said simply. "We save all of them." For the next 18 hours, Marcus and his team worked with desperate intensity to reverse Tyronic modifications and treat injuries that pushed the boundaries of medical possibility. They saved beings who had been turned into living components for alien machinery. They restored consciousness to minds that had been partially merged with hive mind networks. They gave back identities to people who had been reduced to biological resource units. And while they worked, the war continued around them. Admiral Chen's fleet had grown to over 3,000 ships as more human forces arrived from deep space installations that had been hidden throughout the galaxy. These weren't just military vessels. They were mobile factories, research stations, and production facilities that had been disguised as civilian infrastructure for decades. The Tyronic hegemony found themselves fighting an enemy that could rebuild faster than they could destroy, adapt quicker than they could evolve, and manufacture weapons more efficiently than they could grow bioships. Every tactic that had worked against other species failed against humans who had learned warfare on a world that tried to kill them every day. The turning point came at the Battle of the Nexus, where the Tyronic main fleet made their desperate last stand. Over 5,000 bioships arranged themselves in a defensive formation around their command vessel, a creature the size of a small moon that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns visible across star systems. Marcus watched the battle from the medical bay of the Pale Horse, monitoring casualty reports and preparing for the wounded. But as human forces engaged the enemy fleet, something unprecedented happened. There were no human casualties. The battle lasted 3 hours, and when it ended, the Tyronic main fleet was gone. Not destroyed, consumed. Human weapons had turned the enemy bioships against each other, making them believe their own fleet mates were hostile. The massive command vessel had torn itself apart in confusion, its own biological systems convinced that every part of its body was a foreign invader. "Medical teams to prisoner processing," came the order. "We have survivors." Marcus transported to the remains of the command vessel with his team, expecting to find the usual mix of dead and dying Tyronics. Instead, they found the leadership of the entire hegemony, dozens of beings that looked different from the soldiers they had encountered before. These Tyronics were larger, more sophisticated, with modifications that suggested they were the architects of the invasion rather than just its tools, and they were terrified. The largest of them, A creature that stood 3 meters tall with compound eyes that reflected intelligence and desperation, attempted to communicate using translation protocols it had learned from captured Confederation personnel. "We surrender," it said in halting galactic standard. "Submit to your dominance. Offer servitude in exchange for survival." Marcus looked at this being that had orchestrated the enslavement of millions, the destruction of entire civilizations, and the threat of galactic extinction. His medical oath said to preserve life. His human instinct said something very different. "You had your chance to surrender," Marcus replied. "We offered coexistence. You chose extermination." "Please," the creature pleaded. "We did not understand. You appeared weak like others we conquered. We did not know you were apex predators hiding among prey species." Marcus felt something cold and final settle in his chest. This was the moment when humanity would choose what kind of species they wanted to be. The compassionate healers they had tried to become, or the efficient killers they had always been capable of being. He activated his communicator and spoke directly to Admiral Chen. "Admiral, requesting guidance on prisoner disposition. We have tyrannic leadership in custody." Sarah's voice came back immediately, carrying the weight of command decisions that would define humanity's future among the stars. "Colonel, what does your medical assessment suggest?" Marcus looked at the tyrannic leaders, reading fear in their compound eyes, understanding in their body language that they had pushed the wrong species too far. They knew what was coming. "Terminal condition," he said quietly. "No treatment possible." "Understood. Proceed with medical assessment." The transmission ended, leaving Marcus alone with his team and the creatures that had threatened everything he had spent 3 years trying to protect. The choice was his, and he knew what choice a human from Earth would make. 6 weeks later, Ambassador Sarah Chen stood before the reconvened Galactic Council, wearing civilian clothes again but carrying herself with authority that hadn't been there before. The great chamber was packed with representatives from hundreds of worlds, all of whom looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "The tyrannic threat has been eliminated," she announced simply. "All occupied systems have been liberated. Prisoners have been returned to their home worlds. The galaxy is safe." Stunned silence greeted this statement. Fleet Admiral Gorvac, who had watched his forces shattered by tyrannic bioships, could barely speak. "Eliminated? All of them? All military forces, all command structures, and all biological weapons capabilities," Sarah confirmed. "The tyrannic hegemony no longer exists as a threat to galactic civilization." "What about survivors?" asked Council Speaker Lithia. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her words carried finality that made the chamber collectively shiver. "There are no survivors. The tyrannic hegemony chose extinction when they rejected coexistence. We simply helped them achieve their goal." Dr. Webb, no longer Colonel Webb, appeared beside her, having resumed his role as a civilian healer. But everyone in the chamber could see that something had changed in him, just as something had changed in all humans throughout the galaxy. "The medical rehabilitation of liberated prisoners is proceeding well," he reported. "Most will make full recoveries. The psychological trauma will take longer to heal, but we're confident that all survivors will eventually resume normal lives." Representative Quill's aquatic form rippled with confusion in his communication sphere. "How is this possible?"